What's up, guys? What's up? And welcome to week 4 of Sweep Up the Middle podcast, talking fantasy football here. I am your host, Mitchell Ryan, checking in. Hope everybody's having a great Wednesday night. It will be Thursday when you're listening to this, of course. But yeah, week 3. What a crazy week. I'm looking at some of the scores on my monitor over here. And starting off with Thursday, you have a 41-39 final score between the Rams and the 49ers. The Rams did everything possible to try to lose that game with the fumbled kick return and then the lost fumble on the onside kick. So that was a crazy game. Then you had the Jaguars demolishing the Ravens, who had negative 6 points on defense, who some people had in both leagues. In London, embarrassing for the Ravens. And then the Colts beat the Browns. Nobody cares. Eagles 27, Giants 24. Eagles with a 61-yard field goal to cap that with a rookie kicker, which was pretty amazing. Then, if people bet money on the Dolphins over the Jets, that was bad because the Jets beat them 20-6. Steelers getting embarrassed by the Bears 23-17. Saints killing the Panthers 34-13. The Bills embarrassing the Broncos 26-16, which the Bills are 2-1, but they haven't played anybody really, and it was at home. To me, that was kind of like the Cowboys going into the Broncos and getting demolished. The Broncos going into the Bills and getting demolished. Lions should have beat the Falcons, but the Falcons ended up winning 30-26. Somebody had Golden Tate in the league. Vikings defeating the Bucks. Patriots beating the Texans 36-33. Brady goes for 378, 5 touchdowns, and we all knew he was going to have that comeback there. Titans beat the Seahawks. The Packers edge out the Bengals, which send the Bengals to 0-3. And the Bengals controlled all of that game, but that's what happens when you play Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers doesn't have a running game. Yes, Ty Montgomery is converted, but he's still PPR back, and they're not getting a lot of yards from rushing the football, which if they don't win the Super Bowl, it's probably going to be because they don't have a run game. But Rodgers can still take them to the NFC Championship just like he did last year. So when you have Aaron Rodgers, you can win any game just like they showed you there. Chiefs took care of the Chargers. The Redskins blew out the Raiders. Embarrassing game for the Raiders on Sunday Night Football. And then the Cowboys really not controlling that game at all, and they somehow won by double digits, which is amazing, which is good to hear for the Cowboys. And I predicted 27-17, so I'm pretty happy with that outcome. So yeah, what a fun, interesting, weird week of fantasy football. I feel like a lot of people lost money in Vegas this week because the spreads were just ridiculous, and the outcomes were just even more ridiculous. So, fun week. Let's look to week 4, and let's start with quarterback startups. For me, big one this week, Trevor Siemian versus the Raiders. He balls at home kind of like Big Ben, which we'll talk about in a bit. But he's averaging more than 20 points at home, and the Raiders are giving up more than 20 points per outing against quarterbacks. So Trevor Siemian, big start this week. Raiders just got blown up by Kirk Cousins. So for me, easy start, Trevor Siemian. The Raiders have to prove it to me first. Marcus Mariota versus the Texans is another big start. He's a top 10 play, checking in at number 10. Overall ranked quarterbacks. And like I said, Brady went for 378 and 5 touchdowns. Yes, he's not Brady, but he's still a pretty dang good quarterback. And look, that Texans secondary is just a bad secondary right now. They're getting blown up. Chris Hogan went for 2 touchdowns. Gronk had 1. And the new addition that I forgot his name, Brandon Cooks, went for 2 touchdowns. So apologize for that little brain fart. But yeah, Marcus Mariota start for me this week. And then last, don't try to be a homer too much, but Dak Prescott versus the Rams. When it was all said and done and everybody thought he was having a terrible game last week and he was missing all his passes, he was 13 for 18 with 2 passing touchdowns, a rushing touchdown, and had 22 fantasy points. So I haven't done a rant in a while about anything, but just give me about 20 seconds here. When Dak Prescott misses a throw, he doesn't turn the ball over. Romo was a gunslinger. Brett Favre was a gunslinger. But they turn the ball over a little bit. When Dak misses, he misses in places he can make mistakes. And not every quarterback's perfect. And y'all forget he's in his second year. But we don't need to freak out about a sophomore quarterback leading a possible NFC Championship, maybe Super Bowl team. And he's not turning the ball over. What's wrong with that, guys? He's 13 for 18 and had 22 points last week. We're back. And that was a good Cardinals D too. Patrick Peterson was locking down Dez, which unfortunate but true. And the fact of the matter is Brian Hoyer went for 25 points last week against this Rams defense. Yes, the Rams are a top 5 ranked defense, but that was mostly because of a big week first week. For me, Dak Prescott, big start this week. Next, Big Ben versus the Ravens. As I mentioned already, Big Ben's good at home, but it's the complete opposite when he's on the road. He's terrible on the road. He had only 11 against the Bears, and he's only averaging 13 points on the road since 2013. And look, that Ravens defense is going to be motivated after getting their shit kicked in London by the Jaguars 44-7. So I am not starting Big Ben this week because of all those things as I mentioned. And my next one, which might be surprising, but Matt Stafford versus the Vikings. Look, Vikings at home, last 12 home games, only Aaron Rodgers and Andrew Luck have scored more than 15 points against them. And Stafford has averaged less than 15 points the last 4 outings against the Vikings. So, Vikings, good D, home, Skull Nation. I'm avoiding Matt Stafford this week. Next, running back starts, Jay Ajayi versus the Saints. He was 11 for 16 last week and had 3 points, and he hurt a lot of fantasy teams because he's supposed to be your workhorse running back. You drafted him first or second round, and now you're just wondering what the heck's going on. But let's remember, it is the Saints. They're allowing the most scrimmage yards and PPR points to running backs at 203 yards and 34 points respectively. So he's your bell horse back. He's going against one of the worst defenses in the NFL right now. J.J. immediate start versus the Saints. Next, C.J. Anderson versus the Raiders. He went for 8 for 36 and had 5 points too. And you might be freaking out because they have Booker coming back and Jamal Charles got equal the amount of touches to C.J. Anderson. But let's remember, C.J. Anderson played 70% of the snaps to Jamal Charles 30%. Yes, it might come out to like 60% Anderson and then 40% between Charles and Booker. But the fact of the matter is Anderson's a clear-cut back here. He is the leader out of that backfield. Like I said, he had 70% of the snaps, so his touches aren't going anywhere. And he's averaged almost 20 at home since last year. So for me, C.J. Anderson, big start versus the Raiders this week, who just let Thompson go off, and the Raiders got demolished by the Redskins, as I mentioned. And next, Chris Carson versus the Colts. He showed that this is his backfield right now. Thomas Rawls is just, they're not giving him opportunity. Eddie Lacy's a joke. C.J. Prosise is your third down PPR back. So they've had a minimum running game this year. Colts are bad on D. I think he has a big game. Just it's a recipe for success. I think he has a big game this week. Look for the 80 to 100 yards, which would be a good week for him. Next, running back sit-ems. Mark Ingram versus the Dolphins. If you tell me something that I hate in fantasy football, to me, it's a running back committee. Because, kind of like the Patriots, you don't know who you're going to start. It can really hurt your team one week, but help your team one week. And you might be benching them and starting them those weeks as well, too. So it can just be a cluster. It can be a headache. And for me, I don't want that stress in my life. And Mark Ingram last year was a lead back. You know, he was the absolute best version of himself last year. And then they go in and get Adrian Peterson, and then they draft Kamara. So for me, I don't know where the touches are going, and I don't even want to worry about that. But you also have Kenny Stills coming back off the suspension. You have Coleman, you have Fleener, and you have Michael Thomas, who they need to get him the ball as much as they can. And for me, I'm just going to avoid Mark Ingram, even though he does lead him in snaps and touches, but he's still the 20th overall ranked back, and the Dolphins have been stout against running backs this year. So I don't want to deal with all that. I'm just avoiding Mark Ingram this week. Next, Lamar Miller versus the Titans. He's the 23rd ranked back right now and only averaging 9 points. And he lost a little bit of his workload last week to Foreman. Miller had 15 touches. Foreman had 10 touches. So it's getting closer and closer. And if he doesn't start producing, Foreman's going to take over. So keep Foreman on your radar for sure. Definitely won't be able to get him now, but that's fine. And Titans, not bad, but pretty decent against run. And as I expect, Mariota's going to ball out this week. Obviously, he's doing my starts. So it could be playing from behind, which means they could be passing the ball more. Maybe some PPR touches in there. But if I'm looking at a running back one matchup, I'm looking other places other than the one. Wide receiver starts. Speaking of the Texans, again, playing from behind, enter DeAndre Hopkins. And the fact of the matter is he balls out versus the Titans. In his last 6 games, out of 4 of those, he's almost scored 20 points. I think the average is 19.5. And in a game in 2014, he had 9 catches for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. And the Titans have allowed the 3rd most PPR points to wide receivers. DeAndre Hopkins must start this week. He's been pretty stout this year, and he's a top 10 wide receiver right now. So this is an obvious one, but I just want to give you that information, even if you're for some reason thinking that you couldn't start him. Again, Golden Tate versus the Vikings. I mentioned him last week. He's a PPR machine. Should have had a touchdown last week. The Lions should have handed the Falcons their first loss. However, It is what it is. You can't control the NFL. Move on. Golden Tate's third in catches and the 11th ranked wide receiver right now. And again, Xavier Rhodes for the Vikings, he's only an outside cornerback. So he's going against all the outside corners. Golden Tate works inside the slot 78% of the time. So when you have a PPR machine, probably not going to get over the top passes because, again, Matt Stafford's in my sit-em. He's probably going to be checking down a lot to Golden Tate. So I could easily see Golden Tate having 8 to 9 catches for 80 to 90 yards and get you right around 16 to 18 points. Not a touchdown, but hey, we don't need that. A good solid outing from a slot wide receiver right there. Next, one of the wide receiver GOATs to this day, Larry Fitzgerald going against the 49ers. He had 33 against the Cowboys. He had an amazing catch at the end of the game against Orlando Scandrick, who only has one hand, granted. But look, the 49ers D is terrible. They gave up more than 35 points this week, and he's averaging 9 catches and 25 fantasy points the last 2 years versus the 49ers, who are just a terrible team all around. They made Jared Goff look amazing. They made Sammy Watkins look amazing, who is still one of my sit-ems for the year. I was down on Sammy Watkins. I think that was a fluke. So again, Larry Fitz, 49ers. Next, we'll go to sit-ems. Amari Cooper versus the Broncos. Amari Cooper's a shell of himself right now, and I don't think Derek Carr trusts him too much. I had him last year, and we all thought he got rid of the drops cases last year from the year before and his rookie year. But you just saw a couple drops this last week, and yes, it was a fluke game, but man, Carr was looking more towards Crabtree, and that whole offense was off. Each receiver only had one catch, the 2 that I talked about. But yeah, when you're dropping balls, you have a lack of confidence from your quarterback. That's just not a good recipe for success, especially when you're going against the Broncos defense. And in 4 starts against the Broncos, he only has 14 catches for 142 yards and 1 touchdown, So when you add that up, that's less than 4 catches, less than 40 yards, and only 1 touchdown in that 4-game span. So I'm avoiding Amari Cooper this week. He needs to prove something to me first. Next, Terrell Pryor versus the Chiefs. And man, I feel sorry for all y'all that drafted him high, but right now he's the 63rd ranked wide receiver. Never would have thought I was saying that. He was better with the Browns. Who would have thought that? He is the snaps leader at 162 and the targets leader at 19, but he's still the 63rd ranked wide receiver, and the Chiefs have a pretty good defense. So, again, Terrell Pryor's got to show me something before he starts in one of my leagues. Those are your sit-em for receivers. We'll move on to tight ends now. Kyle Rudolph versus the Lions. 3rd time's a charm. Yes, he had Case Keenum the last 2 weeks. Shout out, Abilene. Case Keenum balled out. He had 369 yards. He looked enough to be able to run the offense, but the Lions are terrible against tight ends. They've allowed 8 touchdowns last year and including this year, and 17 points on average, and Ingram went for 14 points and a touchdown in week 2. So I think Kyle Rudolph gets back on track no matter who the quarterback is because the Lions do not know how to cover the tight end position. Next, this one that's been creeping up, who has 2 touchdowns this year, 2 15-point games this year, Charles Clay versus the Falcons. He had 15 points against the Broncos too, which they're not good against tight ends, but they're still a really, really good defense. And the 2 big stats that reach out to me so far this year is 10th in snap percentage and 8th in targets for tight ends. When tight ends, they're very, very slim and there's not a lot of meat on the bone from that position. I mean, you have Gronk, but look, Greg Olson's out, Jordan Reed's injured, and he's never healthy and doesn't score touchdowns anymore. There's not a lot of, people to pick from. So you're either starting, Kyle Rudolph or Jimmy Graham, but Charles Clay is a good one to look at too. I think he's a good start this week, and they're probably going to be playing behind from the Falcons. So he could be looking at getting a lot of work early on if they're playing from, 2 touchdowns in the first half. So for me, 2 touchdowns first 2 weeks. Charles Clay, start for me this week. We'll move to sit-em. Speaking of Ingram, he's a sit-em for me against the Bucs. Yes, he's averaging 10 points a game, but the Bucs have allowed the 7th fewest points and 9 average at home since last year, and just 6 this year. So they've there's only been 2 games, but only averaged a whole full year, only 9 points to tight ends and 6 this year. I'm avoiding Ingram this week. And then Coby Fleener versus the Dolphins. Willie Snead's back, as I mentioned already with Mark Ingram. You have Ingram, you have Peterson, you have Kamara, you have Coleman, you have Snead, you have Thomas. They need to get him the ball more. And then you have Coby Fleener. There's just way too many people to feed in that offense. The Saints can be unpredictable at times and moving the ball around, having so many options for Drew Brees. For me, with Willie Snead coming back, a lot of mouths to feed, as I already mentioned. I would avoid him. His points are decreasing every week too since week 1. I'd sit Coby Fleener. Moving to defenses, we'll just name them off pretty quick. Seahawks, I'm starting them versus the Colts. Jacoby Brissett, nothing more. Bengals versus the Browns. Browns, rookie quarterback Kaiser, nothing more. Patriots versus the Panthers. Last 2 weeks against Panthers, the opposing defenses have averaged 12 points, which is a really good fantasy week for defenses. You don't want to get in all that mishap of having negative or no points at all, like having the Ravens team who had -6, and that was a 16-point swing from the starting out to 10 points. So I'm avoiding the Panthers going against the Patriots avoiding the Panthers D, and I'm starting the Patriots D this week because I feel like the Panthers are going to be from behind, and defenses have been very well against the Panthers. Moving to Sid'em, Redskin versus the Chiefs. The defenses going against the Chiefs have only averaged 3 points a game this year, so the Chiefs are good, especially at home, Arrowhead. And the Redskins, yes, they looked good last week, but for me, Alex Smith I hate to say this, being the game manager he is, but he can manage a game. He doesn't risk the ball as much as Carr, and I think Alex Smith's going to have a good game, hand off to Kareem Hunt, get the ball out to Hill and Kelsey. And so I'm not starting the Redskins D this week. Texans versus Titans, I'm not starting either one of them. I think it's going to be another mid-30 points game, and I think Mariota balls, as I mentioned. I think Deshaun Watson has a good game as well. I think it's going to be a very low turnover game, which might be amazing to y'all, but I just feel like there's just way too many options, too many checkdowns here, that I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, and there's not a lot of opportunities for your defense to score a lot of points, especially if they don't get the ball or turnover. If they don't get the ball and have it turn over, or allowing a lot of points and a lot of yards as well too. So I'm not starting the Texans or the Titans. So we'll move into bold predictions. And last week I predicted that the Patriots running backs would not have a rushing touchdown. Not a big bold prediction, but when you have 3 running backs that get a lot of playing time and sometimes a 4th, it can be, especially with the offense like the Patriots, they can move the ball up and down the field. So yeah, that was a bold prediction. I'll stick with it. My other bold prediction was Dez would go for 100 and a touchdown. Zeke would go for 100 and a touchdown. Dez went for 2 for 12 and a touchdown, so I got that one wrong. Peterson locked him up. Props to him. They finally got Dez that touchdown catch, putting him in the slot, working man-to-man. And then Zeke went for 80 and a touchdown, so pretty close there. So they got Zeke back on track. I think that offensive line needs to gel. Look, they lost Leary at left guard, and then they lost Doug Free to retirement. So putting Lyle Collins where he was at left guard a little bit until he got injured, moving in right tackle, and Chaz Green, who's always been tackle, moving to left guard, who's not the best left guard right now, to be honest. Just a lot of gelling going on there. So finally, it looks good to see that Zeke got 80 yards and a touchdown last week. With my bold predictions this week, I'm going to say Jay Ajayi and CJ Anderson both go for 100 yards and a touchdown. I say they both have really good matchups this week. CJ's at home. Ajayi's going against the Saints, who are the worst against running backs this year. Both get 100 yards and both get a touchdown this week. So that is week 4 of Sweep Up the Middle podcast. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Of course, this is Mitchell Ryan here. Always shout out to NFL Network and ESPN for the amazing stats. And I have the best tools on mitchellryan21.com/SUTM. Please check that out. Reach out to the Twitter handles at SUTM Podcast and Facebook handle as well, at SUTM Podcast. Please click here on my YouTube channel to subscribe and click here to watch last week's video. Again, this is Mitchell Ryan checking out. Y'all have a good one.